What does it mean to love trans people as a Christian? Note this is a different question from is it a sin to be trans? Or is it even possible to be trans in some metaphysical sense of the truth of the world by Christian doctrine? Is it possible to be trans? Usually, when Christians discuss trans people, we kind of focus on questions like that, but it's not really the most important question. Uh, our task as Christians is first and foremost to love our neighbors. And it turns out that the answer to those sorts of questions is not as important as you might think in answering the question of how to love trans people. Um, so I'd like to suggest some possible ways that we could look at this question. So let me first, I'll speak to those who are most opposed to transition. Uh, Christians out there who believe God made humans male and female, period, and any attempt to mess with that is wrong. Men remain men, women remain women, no matter what treatments or surgeries they undergo. Christians who think that transgender people are crazy, and that our feelings of being a different gender are delusions. Um, well, even if that might be the way that you see things, we do have data that shows that this delusion is extremely strong, really, really strong. Trans people who are not treated by their families and communities as their transition gender just have a really, really high suicide rate. Um, Many will hear this, are aware of this, and dismiss it as some sort of like emotional blackmail, and take where, oh, I can't do this because that would be caving in to this threat, and sort of take a we don't negotiate with terrorists kind of approach. But this really does not apply in this situation. Um, Terrorists do what they do to try to coerce you into taking some action. And so you don't want to give in to that because it will encourage them to do it more. But trans people are not trying to coerce you. Giving us what we want of using our name and pronouns is not going to make us kill ourselves more. It's going to do the exact opposite of that. We're not trying to coerce you. Trans people who are suicidal, they just don't find life worth living as their birth gender. It's miserable and painful, and they can't take it and take the steps necessary to end their lives, to relieve that suffering. And so they're doing it for themselves. They're not doing it to convince you of something. They'd still do it even if it has no chance of changing your mind, which it often seems it does not have a chance of changing your mind. They still do it. But we have clear data that shows that the really simple act of just using a trans person's chosen name and pronouns just makes a huge, huge difference in reducing depression, reducing anxiety, reducing suicidal ideation, reducing actual suicide rates, suicide attempts. I mean, it really just makes a huge difference in mental health in so many ways. And it's free. It's really easy to do. It's the same thing you do for everyone else. You refer to them the way they want to be referred to. So why wouldn't we want to do that? It's really something so easy with such amazing benefits. Um, so if we love trans people, like, we should want to do that. And even if you'll always be convinced that transitioning is sinful, you don't think it's possible, whatever it might be, uh, don't you still want to maximize the chances that the sinner lives, and has a chance to find Christ's forgiveness? Isn't being a welcoming community that doesn't constantly antagonize trans people going to increase the chances of trans people doing that? So the obvious answer of how to love trans people, first and foremost, is just refer to us the way we ask to be referred to. You don't want us to kill ourselves, fingers crossed, I hope that's true. You don't want us to be depressed, so you just do this extremely minor courtesy with your language to try and prevent it. Even if you consider us your enemy, you love your enemies, and so you should still want to do this. Imagine you encountered a delusional person, and they thought something ridiculous. They are convinced that they are a stranded alien spaceship captain named Captain Floopcorp. They feel this delusion like really strongly, and you can see that. They hurt themselves. They've tried to kill themselves before, more than once. You can see when if you try and say like your name is Kevin, that just hurts them deeply, and you can see that. And know that they genuinely feel this great pain from you telling them the truth that their name is Kevin. I mean, they are not Captain Floopcorp, but they feel this delusion really strongly, and you see the pain it causes not to use that name, Captain Floopcorp. Wouldn't you just have compassion and just call him that anyway? I mean, you know it's not true, but you don't want to inflict this pain on someone for absolutely no reason. It's not some, you're not on trial and need to be like, no, their name is Kevin, and that's final. It's of crucial importance that we talk about this. No, what's of crucial importance is just that this person that you love and care about as a fellow human being doesn't kill themselves, doesn't hurt themselves, isn't depressed and upset. So you don't need to act like you have this solemn obligation to the truth about somebody's gender. You hide your true feelings about things all the time. If a kid comes up to you and is like, I'm Spider-Man, you don't say, hey, don't you know Spider-Man is a fictional character, and even if they were real, you're not them. You don't do that. You say, oh, Spider-Man, save me, I need your help, and you play along, and you don't feel like, oh my gosh, I've sinned horribly by going against the truth. I shouldn't have told them they're Spider-Man. They're really, Bradley. You don't do that. Or, if somebody is freaking out and they're like, oh my God, I think I'm ugly and nobody likes me. If you look at them and you're like, oh, I agree. I think that this person is ugly. You're not going to tell them that just because you think, oh, I must stand by the truth. You politely compliment them, try and lift up their spirits. This is just like that. It's not really hard to do at all. There's nothing on the line except you can do one thing that's gonna, make somebody happy and really help them, or you can do another thing that's going to be really painful Might not seem like it should be that painful, but it'll be very painful to misgender a trans person, and there's just no reason to do it. Actually, I have a friend, Roger, who is a devout Christian, evangelical, I think. I don't want to label him. Maybe that's not what he considers himself. But you know, we talk regularly. I've talked about transition and theological discussions about it with Roger many times. Well, I don't know, many times, but for a long time. And you know, so I know how he feels. I know that, you know, in his heart of hearts, he thinks I'm not a real woman, that God made me immutably a man. But that doesn't stop him from calling me my name, Brienne. Doesn't stop him from using she, her pronouns with me. I mean, he even goes kind of the extra mile, I would say, compared to most, in that, like, it really feels like he's thinking of me as a woman. You know, last time I saw him, he said, referring to me, never ask a woman her age, which is, you know, an abstract level of treating me as a woman that you don't always get. You know, some people just use pronouns, but you can see that they aren't really changing their thinking. So, I mean, I really appreciate that about him. And as a result of that, like, we have this wonderful friendship. I can trust him, confide in him. I talked with him today, actually, just, you know, for like 2 hours. We speak regularly and talk about God and life. And boy, what a blessing. What a blessing that he chooses not to just, for no reason, put a stumbling block in my way. What bountiful fruit this practice of just referring to me the way I ask to be referred leads to. Whereas, you know, you compare that to the very rotten fruit of driving people to suicide. So we actually can answer pretty easily, you know, the most important question, I think, of how to love trans people. It's not the only thing that you should do to love trans people. Just use the right name and pronouns. But if you do that, like, that's a huge step. It's a big part of it. But we can do better than that framing. You know, if your love for trans people is limited to thinking, okay, trans people are crazy, you're gonna end up with kind of a hollow love. You'll miss out on some beautiful things that glorify God. So let's look at maybe some better ways of thinking of it. I mean, even somebody who is accepting of trans people might still kind of have this mental illness model. So maybe there's a better way of looking at things. But to get into a better way, I think we do need to kind of look at the theological, metaphysical questions about, you know, what does it mean to be trans? What does Christian doctrine have to say about it? So, what's the idea that people who oppose it base that on? Certainly not something in the Bible that says, don't be trans, that's a sin. The Bible doesn't mention trans people. So it's not that. Instead, it's sort of an argument that people infer from other things in the Bible. So the standard argument is God made us male and female, and if we're trying to change that, we are telling him he made a mistake. And of course, God does not make mistakes. Sometimes people also bring up Deuteronomy 22:5, which prohibits men from dressing like women and vice versa. But acceptance of the reality of transition doesn't actually have to conflict with either of those things, because we are not purely beings of flesh. Christian doctrine, we are spiritual beings who have bodies of flesh as well, but our spirit is really the more important part of our being. It is eternal, and that's something that had to be argued. That isn't something that is just a given in our world. People had to be convinced we do not live on bread alone, that we are spiritual beings. Unless we think that, there's some sort of even balance, that we're like 50% flesh, 50% spirit, it's even. They're both equally important. That is not the case. Scripture really stresses that the spirit is what's important. Our flesh it's dead to sin. It's corrupted. It's a decaying vessel which is destined to return to the dust. All of Romans chapter 8 is good stuff on spirit versus flesh, but some particularly good verses in there. He condemned sin in the flesh, so that the requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For those who are in accord with the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who are in accord with the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. Or, if Christ is in you, though the body is dead because of sin, yet the Spirit is alive because of righteousness. Or, my favorite of them all, so then, brothers and sisters, we are under obligation, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you are living in accord with the flesh, you are going to die. But if by the Spirit you are putting to death the deeds of the body, you will live. Now, how can we read that and then say, well, trans people, your flesh is a particular way, so you are under obligation to live that way? It goes directly against this. It's saying we are not under an obligation to the flesh. We are not supposed to live according to it. We're supposed to live according to the Spirit. So, that's some very good stuff. So the corruption of sin has led our fleshly bodies to have all sorts of flaws that break away from God's perfect design. And, we acknowledge this readily when we medically correct various birth defects. We know that we're not telling God he made a mistake just because our corrupted flesh has flaws, and we surgically correct a cleft palate, or any of a variety of other defects. So a simple explanation of trans people existing is just that corruption of sin made our bodies the wrong sex, while our spirits remained as God created them, the opposite sex of the flesh. I'm not saying that everybody's spirit is the opposite of their flesh. Not everybody has a cleft palate. Not everybody has whatever other defects people can be born with. But for the people who are born that way, then their spirits could be the opposite sex of what their flesh is. And that's actually, how trans people tend to describe being trans. That, you hear people say that we are born in the wrong body. Well, Christian doctrine shouldn't really have a problem with that. We've all been born into bodies that are wrong in some way. You know, our body could have the wrong number of limbs, or the wrong number of chromosomes, or organs in the wrong places, or countless other things wrong with them. Why shouldn't we consider the possibility that someone could be born with the wrong sex characteristics? Like, it's already something we know happens, at least in part. You know, somebody there's various intersex conditions where people, you know, may genetically have XX or XY chromosomes, which is how a lot of people like to define sex, though it's really not defined that simply. But you know, people have these conditions where they have ambiguous sex characteristics. So we know that's possible for somebody to partially have their sex wrong. It's very easy to see and documented. So why couldn't it be possible for a trans person to just have all of their sex characteristics be wrong, down to the chromosome? I mean, if we can have the wrong number of chromosomes, why can't we have the wrong X or Y chromosome? You know, an X instead of a Y, or vice versa. There's no reason to think that, oh, the corruption of sin can lead to all these other defects, but it couldn't possibly lead to that one. You know, maybe you're not sure if it's possible, because there's not a way to look inside somebody's spirit and see what sex it is. But we should at least consider that it could be true. It's certainly the way trans people feel, and they're the ones, we are the ones who know best our own spirits. So if you accept that maybe that's a possibility, then the best thing you could do to love trans people is to just trust us when we say it's true. God will judge us if it's not. You know, it's no sweat off your back. If it's sinful, then it's our sin, not yours. And God will judge us, not you. You know, he's not going to judge you for trusting us when we describe our own spirit to you. You can just believe us, and you know, it's up to him to tell us if we're wrong. And boy, like, look at what beautiful things that it could lead to if you accept that possibility. You know, as Christians, we're meant to live in the Spirit. I mean, Romans 8 is all about that. But often the fruits of that are difficult to just directly see. You know, living in the Spirit leads to subtle changes in your behavior. You're loving more, you're forgiving more, but you look the same. And, you know, somebody who's not convinced that humans are spiritual beings, a materialist, you know, we might struggle to convince them that changes that living in the Spirit have made to us are really the result of some, you know, spirit, and not just, you know, us changing our behavior. And so, you know, that could be something that is different with trans people, because when we live according to our spirits, it's very visible. You can't really get around it. I mean, you know, you see the change. You see a trans person as they were born, and then you see that something, you know, so powerful as even just like the core sex of somebody's body is not defining them. You see, it's very hard to argue against people being spiritual beings if you see somebody whose spirit has so visibly overcome their flesh. So we really stand as if you're willing to understand things in this way, suddenly instead of being an abomination that you have to fight against, you can see, oh, well, trans people could actually be considered kind of a beautiful testament to the glory of God's triumph of the spirit over the flesh. And that's a wonderful thing. I mean, if our spirits can overcome, something as seemingly core as our very sex, then is there anything of the flesh that can't be conquered? It's really, really quite lovely. So while you can partially love trans people by framing us as crazy, the love can really manifest if you instead think of us as corrupted by sin, like everyone else, and that is desirable to do something about. And the concerns about Deuteronomy disappear, because if trans people's spirits truly are the sex that we say they are, then Deuteronomy 22:5 is actually saying that trans people should transition, that a trans woman is a woman and thus should be wearing woman's clothes. But is there an even better option than that one? I think so. It's pretty similar, but just an even better way of looking at it. So in honor of my friend Roger, who loves to speak on things that start with the same letter, I'm going to say, let's consider trans people a celebration. It's a stretch to find a reasonable C word to go along with crazy and corrupted, but hear me out. So, John chapter 9 tells the story of a man who was born blind. And people didn't understand. Well, this must be a result of sin. So they asked Jesus, who sinned to make this man born blind? And he surprised them, saying, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. So in the same way, with our understanding already, if we've taken the corrupted by sin framework, if we think about how transition is a testament to our being spiritual beings, we don't even actually have to view transness as some, it only exists because of corruption caused by sin. Instead, we can explain it. I'm not saying that this definitely is the case, but another way to think of it is that we could explain it the same way Jesus did with that man born blind, that God makes people trans so that the works of God might be displayed in us. And isn't that the most beautiful option of all? The one that glorifies God and celebrates the incredible complexity of his creation? I think so. But you come to your own conclusions, but please consider that no matter which of these three framings you use, the best thing you can do to love a trans person is to just use our name and pronouns, and it's not a problem to do that. That doesn't conflict with any of those conceptions of trans people. Anyway, thanks for watching.